I'll read this and then we'll start. Welcome to the Morning Phillips series, hosted today on YouTube. The Morning Phillips series, originally hosted at the Garage co-working space in Rapid City, South Dakota, was created to discuss philanthropy, civil society, and community. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with good people doing good things creatively and collaboratively. The format is a conversation, not a presentation, 2 tables, 2 chairs, 2 computers, and a community of interested people. Today, we are pleased to have with us an accomplished tax attorney, recognized community leader, nonprofit leader, and a person with 107 siblings. A special thanks to the Bush Foundation, the Numad Group, Rural Philanthropy Institute, and the Garage for hosting today's conversation. Thanks to all those who have joined us for over 70 previous conversations. And now with that, we are pleased to welcome Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, the Chief Executive Officer for Feeding America, the nation's leading domestic hunger relief organization and second largest U.S. charity. Claire, thanks for spending some time this morning with us.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm wondering if we start with a question about you becoming the CEO of Feeding America and you starting, I believe, in Louisiana as a tax attorney. So when you started out as a tax attorney, did you imagine that later in your career, you would be leading one of the largest charities in the United States? Was that an objective that you had?
So what's interesting is the thing that's odd about my background is that I started as a tax attorney, not that I wound up here. So you mentioned at the top, I'm one of 108 children through biology, adoption, and fostering. And so you know this, Matt, but my whole life I've understood about challenges that people confront. I have so many siblings who have struggled with so much trauma that I thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I certainly didn't think I was going to be a tax lawyer. I thought I was going to be a children's rights advocate. So, but I happened to be good at math. So opportunities kept happening for me. So people who are good at math and they want to be a lawyer often become tax lawyers. So I found myself a tax lawyer, and then I did general commercial litigation work and tax work. I worked in a law firm. I worked in government over tax litigation. And then I worked at Price Waterhouse and then Price Waterhouse Coopers, accounting firms. All of those things are in line with a person who has a head for math, right? And then I worked at Walmart, where I was in tax. I started out in tax, and I went on to be the executive vice president of finance there. I got more and more responsibilities, but all in finance that whole time. So all of that made sense to people who knew me as a tax lawyer. None of that made sense to anyone who would have known me as a child or who would have been able to see inside of my dreams what my aspirations were for my life and for my career. I just kept getting tapped on the shoulder to do these awesome things that I loved, and I kept on saying yes.
When you think of the opportunity to lead Feeding America, what was it that caused you to say yes to that after this career that had been focused on numbers and finance? Why Feeding America?
Yeah. So let me back up one more step and say I'd been at Walmart. I thought I was going to be at Walmart for 2 years because I could never stay out of a courtroom for longer than 2 years. And then 12 years later, still at Walmart. And I had an executive physical, and I found out that I had cancer. And when that happened, everything changed for me. And I know I've said this to you before, Matt, that I remember distinctly being there, learning of my cancer diagnosis. And almost in a split second after knowing that I had cancer, asking myself, oh my goodness, but what if the best thing I will ever accomplish professionally is the best thing I could ever do at Walmart? And as much Walmart was so good to me, as good as that was, would that be okay? I asked myself, and my answer was no. So I started leaving Walmart in an exam room, actually, when I learned that I had cancer. So where I was going to go, I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was at Walmart, I was on the foundation board. And that is the giving arm, right, at Walmart. So I was on the Walmart Foundation board, and I helped to make decisions about where Walmart was going to make its contributions. And I got to know about Feeding America, because Walmart had doubled down on Feeding America during Katrina, which is kind of connected to me and my background with a name like Babineaux-Fontenot. And Walmart had been invaluable to my home state and my home region during Katrina. And one of the ways that Walmart served the Gulf during that time was through investments in Feeding America, making sure that people had access to the emergency food that they need when suddenly their worlds were torn apart by that horrific hurricane. So I witnessed what Feeding America did and the partnership that Walmart had with it. And then we doubled down at Walmart on the partnership with Feeding America. So I got to know Feeding America better and better when I was there. I left Walmart without a job.
Mm-hmm.
First time in 35 years, I'd go around telling people, Matt, I'm unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
But I chose to give myself some space to think and to contemplate what would be the best use of whatever talents I do have. And fortuitously, the person who runs the foundation at Walmart found out that Feeding America had an opening as CEO. Now, this is after I've already left Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
And unbeknownst to me, she calls the recruiter and says, there's this lady, I think you should talk to her.
Mm.
And here I am.
Claire, thanks for sharing. I think that space that you just described between making the decision to leave Walmart and not having a destination in which you know you're going to, I think that's really difficult for people, for Americans. A major generalization there, but
yes,
that gray space, that space of uncertainty. You mentioned that it was an opportunity for thinking and contemplation. Will you talk a little bit more about that space and that time? How was that for you when somebody that seems to have a lot of direction and motivation, that now you've made a choice to be in uncertainty?
yes. And you know, my husband, without whom, oh my goodness, I just can't imagine that I get to do the things I get to do without having the extraordinary support of my husband, Barry. But he and I had many conversations, and he'd say, oh, Claire, you take so many risks. Like when I go from one job to another job, he said, that is a really risky thing that you're doing. And I think, how is that risky? The last time I had applied for a job was in 1989. People kept tapping me on the shoulder.
Mm.
So they'd say, hey, Claire, I've got this job.
Mm-hmm.
Are you interested? So it wasn't. The biggest professional risk I ever took was the one that you just identified, which was to go jump and not know where I was going to land.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so important for me to do it. And I mentioned earlier that I thought I'd be at Walmart for only 2 years because I'd been running back to a courtroom because I loved litigation. I kept running back to a courtroom, but something at Walmart kept me there. I kept being stimulated and it was working. And the truth is I had to do it because I was afraid that I wouldn't leave.
Mm.
I was afraid that I was going to wait until the perfect job came up and that no job would wind up being perfect. And then I wouldn't leave. And my heart told me I had to. Mm-hmm. This couldn't be just one of those moments. Like I went and talked to Doug McMillan and told him that I was going to be leaving Walmart, and he's a good guy, Doug, and he'd been a good mentor for me, And I remember he told me to wait 6 months, and he told me to go do certain things and blah, blah, blah. And a part of that, I think, might have been that maybe in his heart of hearts, he thought, this would pass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, exactly 6 months later, I was knocking on his door. It wasn't going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
I hoped. I couldn't let it pass.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't let it just be that time when I thought it had to be a turning point for me to go do the things I think I was actually born to do. So I jumped.
Mm-hmm.
And what a wonderful, wonderful jump it was. So I was flying free. Believe it or not, I left the United States for right at 4 months. My husband and I went to Polanco, which is a neighborhood in Mexico City, and we got an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd walk on average 9 miles a day in Polanco, and it was just extraordinary. I cleared my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got my body fit, and I listened to myself during that time. And I had other opportunities come up during that time, and I flew back to the U.S. for some of those. And I thought, oh yeah, this is the one. This has to be the one. And then I fly to the U.S. and go talk, and I'm in the middle of it, and I'm reminding myself of what I learned about myself when I was on those long walks in Mexico City. And I said, no, Claire, hold on. Is that really? Do you just want it to be done with this and go back to, the consistency and predictability of a schedule? Is that really what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And those other places were not right. But this place is.
Mm-hmm.
And had I not done the 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
I would not have done this too. There's so many things that had to happen, I think, in order for this this to happen.
And you talked about in other interviews about authenticity. That's what it sounds like you're getting to, is where your authentic self of what you know that you are to do.
Yeah. I've suffered from imposter syndrome before. I worked before I came to Walmart, I've been practicing law for 16 years before I started at Walmart. And between the time that I said yes to my job, I was vice president of audit and tax policies at Walmart, which I felt I had spent 16 years getting ready for.
Mm-hmm.
I was so sure of myself going into that job. I'm like, I know why they tapped me on the shoulder. Oh yeah, I'm ready for this. Between the time that I said yes and the time that I got to Walmart, just the couple of weeks it took for me to get to Walmart, my team had doubled.
Mm-hmm.
And then every 4 months, my team kept doubling. Just about every 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And about a year and a half in, I was in a job that I'm like, what is wrong with them to put me in this job? I even told my boss when he said they were going to put me in that job, I said, did you see my resume? What would make you think that I should do that? I need some time to get ready. I told him, he said, how much time do you need? I said, about a year. And he said, okay. And 2 weeks later, I was in that job. 2 weeks later, I was in that job. So I arrived in the job feeling the most insecure I've ever felt in my professional life. I didn't think I was ready. So I spent a whole bunch of time pretending that I was somebody else. One of the most important epiphanies of my professional life happened when I realized how desperately I was failing when I was pretending. And people could tell. I'm not that good at acting anyway. So I realized if I kept pretending, I was definitely going to fail. And I really didn't want to fail. So I felt like I was forced to come clean and to say, okay, so here's what you do not get when you get me. This is not who I am. But here's who I am. And I'm going to work really hard at making who I am better and better. But it's never going to be this other.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed so much for me, because then I started celebrating people who were different than I was, for one.
Mm-hmm.
I started hiring people who filled in gaps that I could not fill in. I started doubling down on the things that I thought I did well, like, as an example, coming up in that extraordinary home of mine.
Mm-hmm.
One of my mother's great gifts was she never looked past people. She didn't. My mom, people will say to me, yeah, there are 108 of you, but how many are like real brothers and sisters? I said, no, real brothers and sisters. No, but I mean, how many do you know? I'm like, 108. But now, there are ways that I knew my siblings. Some of my siblings I was in the house with, so we were growing up at the same time. Others of my siblings, I was a grown up, so I saw them less frequently. Every single one of us was my mother's child.
Mm.
Every one of us was my mom and dad, in fact, are in the National Adoption Hall of Fame. And the greatest honor I have ever had to speak is that I gave the keynote address when they were inducted. I'm so grateful I was able to do that. But going back to that extraordinary mom of mine, she had 108 of us, and she had a way to see us all.
Mm.
So when I was in that moment of crisis at Walmart, one of the things I realized about myself was I can see people too.
Mm.
I can not only see who people are, but not as well as my mom, admittedly, but in my own way. I also am able to understand a person's potential. And that's a valuable thing for a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, okay, what am I going to do with that at Walmart, right? And then I've been thinking about, what am I going to do with that every place that I've been? I have a few other skills too, but that's probably one of the big ones.
Thanks, Claire. You bring all of this to Feeding America now as the CEO. For the folks that have tuned in, will you explain Feeding America in 30 seconds?
Oh, in 30 seconds. Okay. Feeding America is, as you've already indicated, the largest anti-hunger organization in the United States. We are a network of 200 food banks. Now, food banks are places where food comes to. We have huge distribution, huge warehouses where food goes to. And then we also have over 60,000 agency partners, meal programs. So many of them don't even realize they're part of our network, but where our food banks will distribute food from those warehouses into some of these pantries. Together, our network during the pandemic has provided over 12 billion meals just during the pandemic alone, over 6 billion meals a year. Over 53 million people last year came to us for help. In addition to that, we have a very strong policy function where we advocate on behalf of policies that will be helpful to people experiencing food insecurity. Our ultimate objective is an America where no one's hungry. And in this country, that's doable. So we work in lots of ways to be a part of ensuring that happens.
So I want to talk more specifically about that objective. But before we go there, as the CEO of the second largest charity in the United States, what does the day look like? Today you're joining us from Chicago, the headquarters of Feeding America, and you're spending an hour with us. You spent an hour with us yesterday, but I'm sure that the rest of the day is filled with other things than video conversations.
Maybe I can put it into two categories, right? So one category would be when I'm outside of this office, what does that day look like? And then the other one would be when I'm inside of this office, what does the day look like? So let me start with when I'm inside of the office. When I'm inside of the office, I spend a large amount of my time investing in our staff. So I at Walmart, there's this thing called coaching while walking around. And it was a great lesson that I bring with me now. I walk the halls. I talk to people. It's a part of my responsibility, and it's a part of my calendar for me to get out of my office, to walk around and to talk to people, to talk about how hot it was in Chicago yesterday, to talk about what's bringing them joy, to talk about what the issues are that they're confronting and trying to help propel our mission. So I engage with our people a lot when I'm in the office. I try to spend a lot of time on strategy when I'm here, on diagnostics, right? I feel I'm well positioned to clear barriers. Are we putting the resources in the right places? Are we prioritizing our work? How's that going? What are we learning? So that's what it tends to be. I tend to spend very little time inside of this office when I'm in this office. I spend time on the floor in conversation with people. I also get the chance to do videos like this one. I get the chance to do media interviews. We are fortunate that we've been able to have a lot of visibility on national and local media. And I get to be an ambassador that does that. I get to engage with members of Congress through Zoom as well. But now when I'm out of here, the vast majority of the time that I spend when I'm outside of this office is in communities with our members. So you might see me with my sleeves rolled up, distributing food. I've been to at least hundreds of food distributions across the country. During the pandemic, we shut down the national office travel to everyone except one person. That would be me. So I was privileged to be an ambassador for our national office, and I went all across the country. I've visited just about all of our food banks. Again, this whole nation. I get to see the whole country, every state. So I go there. I thank that team for the extraordinary work that they do, because when other people were shut down, they couldn't be. They have always been open. They have always been open. So I go say thank you. I listen, I learn, I bring best practices that I've learned from other places and bring back best practices that we can share with others. So that's what it looks like for me. So on a typical week when I'm traveling, I will land. Now I'm flying. Before I was just driving, but I learned that there were some benefits to driving that I use even now that I can fly. So I will fly to one point. Let's say, okay, so I flew into Erie, Pennsylvania, as an example. And then I'll drive from Erie to Lorain, Ohio. Then I'll drive from Lorain, Ohio to the next point, to the next point, to the next point. And I'll go to 5 food banks in 1 week by car. And it gives me a chance to see the communities that people are serving. I go and talk to people in the community and don't tell them what I do for a living. And I'll just say things like, is there a food bank anywhere near here? Have you ever heard of such and such? What I love is I get to go to the food bank then and tell them the stories that their neighbors have told me about who they are and what they need. So that's what my life is like. Pretty good life, huh, Matt?
What's your favorite part of it?
Oh, my favorite part of it. Oh, that's a hard one because there's so many things. But I in the office, my favorite thing is when I'm inside of a moment where there's an unlock with talent, right? So there's someone who didn't think they could do something, and the thing that they wanted to do was hard, and we talk about it together, and they ask for some advice, and they say what they think they might do, and then they go do it, and then they come back and say, oh my goodness, Claire, it worked. Oh, I love when that happens. So in the office, those are my favorite moments. Outside of the office, it is when I have this bit of a routine where I won't visit a food bank without going into the warehouse. And the warehouse is where, we have people who have desk jobs, and then we have people who work in the warehouse, who drive the trucks, who put the stuff on the shelves. And I don't have a lot of rules for my food bank visits, but that's one of them. They get to use me any way that they want, but with this proviso, I will not leave without getting a chance to talk to people who work in the warehouse, right? That's my only rule. So I go to warehouse and I will ask somebody who works in the warehouse and say, so let's say it's you, Matt. I say, Matt, who's the most important person in your world? And you say, oh, definitely my little girl. I said, so would you do a favor for me? Tonight when you go home, would you tell your little girl that because of what you do for a living, there are thousands of little girls all around her who go to bed with food in their bellies? Why don't you tell them that? Or if they say, my grandma, would you tell your grandma that there are elders in your community who don't have to decide whether they're going to pay for prescription drugs or have enough to eat tonight, or who can host a family meal again and use their recipe because of what you do? And the look that washes over them when they process that what I'm saying is true. Those are some of my favorite moments. And you're gonna mess up my makeup. So those are my favorite moments.
Have you always been an optimist?
I think so. I've seen, but life has taught me to be an optimist. So my siblings, going back there, the vast majority of us, the way to become a part of our family was because something wasn't working in yours, in the one you were born to. That's how you typically became a part of our family. And there are all of these triumphs in my family. And people will ask me sometimes, because they're curious, they're like 107 siblings. And they'll say, how many of you are lawyers? I'll go, oh, that's not an important question. And they're like, huh? Well, how many of you are doctors? I said, no. I don't know the answer those questions. And they try to get me to answer, and I won't. They also try to get me to tell them how many are biological, how many are adopted, and how many are foster. I said, no, won't answer. That's not an important question. When I was little, people would actually walk up to us sometimes in the grocery store in my small hometown of Opelousas, and my mom would always be standing there looking at me. I remember it well. And people would say, is that your real sister? And my mom would look at me like, there is only one answer to that question, girl. And I'd look at them and say, oh, yes, ma'am, she's real, just like me. And then we move on. So when I go back to that grounding in the family, we have so many success stories of my brothers and sisters who, despite all of this trauma, who wake up every morning, brush their teeth, comb their hair, and go out to work, who are self-supporting, who have families, who have joy, who make contributions. So I've seen that, and I've seen it happen when the odds were so stacked against so many members of my family. And with nurturing and care on the part of my parents, what can happen. And then in this job, it gives me so much hope, because no matter what crazy is happening, and I know I told this to you yesterday, Matt, you name whatever day over the course of the last, or whatever moment over the course of the last few years as we've been in this pandemic, that you were feeling particularly that it was a really tough day, whatever day that was, whatever was happening, whether it was some political thing that was terrible, or whether it was you thinking about the impacts of COVID, the far-reaching impacts of COVID, or maybe you were looking at one of those lines that our membership was serving, and you're like, oh my goodness. Whatever that day was, I probably was out there in somebody's community, talking to people who had decided on that day that they were going to give of themselves to their neighbors. And I went to red states and blue states and purple states. And in every community I went into, I found good people helping each other everywhere. And I really do wonder, and I'm glad I'll never know, how I would have experienced the last few years if I didn't have the privilege of doing that. So when I go in and I see real people making sacrifices for their neighbors, I know there's goodness in the world. I see it all the time. And I know this country has done extraordinary things against incredible odds. And I know my brothers and sisters have done extraordinary things against incredible odds. So all of those things causing me to be optimistic. And I have so much belief in this nation and who we can be and who we are at our best. So I'm counting on us to be our best. And that requires that I wake up every day trying to be my best and trying to create spaces for people to come into where they can feel good. That's part of the work that I get to do too. But I am so optimistic, and I'm realistic inside of my optimism. But I have data that informs why I should be optimistic. Can I give you one quick piece of data? Can I give you a mix match?
Sure.
Okay. So we have some data that shows that the last time I saw the data, it showed that about 72 billion pounds of perfectly edible food, not counting household waste, were going to landfills, while tens of millions of people were going to food banks for food. You see, on the one hand, that makes it might be discouraging to say, oh my goodness, we'll have all that waste. And it is. But on the other hand, it gives me cause for optimism, because I go, oh wow, it's not that we don't produce enough food. It's not even that we don't have enough food to spare. Is that we need to match that food better sometimes, right? And we need to have these policy interventions as well. But it's math like that that makes me optimistic. And Feeding America, our network, is actually the largest food rescue organization in the whole United States of America. And we've got so much more capacity to rescue even more food. Mm-hmm. So those things, knowing some of the math that doesn't work, right? Yep. And that we can help that math to work better, gives me optimism too.
So let's look at that. So a number of data, a bit of data, you speak about this, it's 40 million pre-pandemic, 40 million people in the United States food insecure. During the pandemic, 60 million people. I think last year, and then in this past year, it's in the 50s, if I understood correctly. It took 10 years after the Great Recession to get to pre-pandemic food insecurity numbers. Then we have COVID, and here we are with probably going into a recession, it looks like, coming off of, and we're still in COVID. Mm-hmm. So, and a couple other points I've heard, 40% of New Yorkers are one paycheck away from being food insecure. Mm-hmm. Across the United States, the average American has $400 in savings. 1 in 6 children in South Dakota are food insecure. And we have some of the poorest counties. In addition to that, we have some of the poorest counties in the country. So as an optimist, as a business person, as you look ahead and you lead Feeding America, what is Feeding America doing differently over the next decade to move those numbers, that reality? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I know that 72 billion is a lot of pounds of food, right? But Feeding America's budget compared to U.S. dollars for farm subsidies and food stamps is over $120 billion. Mm-hmm. And that has, in the U.S. policy piece, has such an important place to play in these numbers, in our reality as in the United States.
Yeah. So
what's Feeding America's role in that?
Right. Well, you've said so many important things, and I want to try to unpack some of them. But let me give you actually a piece of data. I want to look at some of the numbers that you provided, and I'll tell you how they give me some optimism actually in some of the numbers you provided. So in 2020, so going into the pandemic, about 30, I think in 2018, the rate of food insecurity was about, had gotten to 35 million. Okay, in 2019, I'm sorry, it got into 35 million. And then 60 million people turned to the shareable food system for help. But not all 60 million of them wound up being food insecure, because some of them needed us just for a few weeks, needed us for 6 weeks before they got their buildings, their businesses reopened. So we know that what we do is impactful, because the food insecurity rate for 2020 came back. Although 60 million came to us for help, the food insecurity rate wound up being 38 million.
Okay.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
So that means those 60 million, all 60 million of them could have wound up consistently food insecure. Instead, they needed a lift during a window of time. We together were there for them, and they got them over the bridge, and now they're food secure, right? Mm-hmm. But going back to the other point that you're making, but they're right there on the edge, right? And we now are seeing our numbers increase again. So it has to be an all-in fight. One of the things that happened that was really important during the pandemic, I would actually kind of liken it in a much smaller way to my own journey that I talked about at Walmart, where I was so busy focusing on what I wasn't, that I wasn't focused enough on what I was, right? Yeah. I think Feeding America went through that kind of epiphany during the pandemic. And we started saying, well, wait a minute, who else touches 53 million people in a year? Who other than we? That would be just about nobody. No other nonprofit does. So are we really helping to mobilize 53 million people? No. Could we? Yes. So we have a whole body of work right now that's all about helping to connect, educate, and mobilize people who are actually living with food insecurity right now. That's huge. We have a White House conference on hunger that's coming up in September. We are uniquely positioned to help inform a policy platform that is not just based upon what wonks think, but upon what people say they want for themselves. That's actually something we were not really thinking about how we should be doing before the pandemic, but we are going deep and leaning in on as a result of the pandemic. Something else that you talked about was SNAP benefits. SNAP is an extraordinary program that used to not be partisan at all. It actually was something that both parties came up together on and decided, you know what, we've got this thing. We're going to bundle them together so that farmers are working with people who are food insecure, and we're going to come up with options that are going to be good for everybody. So I love that bundling, right? Mutually assured destruction, maybe, but also we progress together. We move each other in order to make progress. Well, the SNAP program is an inordinately successful program. So what the SNAP program used to be called food stamps, we have data that show that for every one meal that our network, which is extraordinary, can provide, SNAP can provide 9. I don't have an aspiration for people to need to get in a line to come get food from us in order to feed their families. I know we need to be here in the gap for people, and we will be here in the gap. But my aspiration is that people don't have to come to us for help. SNAP is one of the ways that they wouldn't have to come to us for help, right? So we are big on SNAP. We help people who are entitled to SNAP to get SNAP applications in, and we also advocate to make certain that SNAP tracks what's actually happening in the real world for people, right? And there have been some advances that have happened during the pandemic that we know we were powerful voices in those advances because Congress told us, you are the most powerful and credible voices in the movement that we're having around SNAP. So that's an area that we are doubling down on. So if we know that we already are the largest source for applications for SNAP, and we're not that deeply penetrated among our members.
Mm-hmm.
And there are millions of people who are entitled to SNAP right now who aren't accessing it. What if we decided that we were going to go deep with a moonshot?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to make sure that every person who's entitled to those benefits gets access to them. What would that mean? So those are the kinds of things that we're doing.
That's wonderful to hear. And so can you see a future where the farm subsidy and food stamps or SNAP program is different? Where what I read recently in The Economist was in 2020, $49 billion were given to the largest 200,000 farmers. 87 billion was given to 40 million recipients of food stamps. So if farmers are truly growing the food, there's lots of holes in that statement, we know, but that total from USDA is over $120 billion. What you're talking about necessitates a change, a system change in how we're approaching, and more so, these two programs working together in a way that they haven't historically. Is that an objective?
Yes, it is. So your audience may already know that there's something called the Farm Bill, right? And it's in the Farm Bill that's about to come up. In the Farm Bill, that's where some bright people decided we're going to combine those farmers with SNAP, right? So that they need to make progress together. They have to come to the table together because they've got mutually assured destruction, and together they can make progress. And I thought it's beautiful. So Farm Bill is about to come up again. And inside of the discussions around the Farm Bill, those are the kinds of conversations we ought to be having. Well, we ought to start with a fundamental, what I think we often do in my organization, in myself, and as a nation. I find we actually don't start with, so what are we actually trying to solve for? So what's the point of this, right? And there might be 3 primary things that we're trying to do. There shouldn't be 103, right? Not as many as I have brothers and sisters for that matter, but there might be 3 top objectives, and we should force rank those objectives. And then that should be true north. And then we should have conversations that are guided by that. It's something, if I may, that at Feeding America that I thought was important that we do, and that I've worked really hard to instill in the fabric of our culture. When I turn on my computer, it says people experiencing hunger are at the center of all we do. So I want people to understand in this work, the most compelling arguments you'll ever make to me are ones where you say, where you're solving for, and what's that going to mean for people experiencing food insecurity? Right? And if you're telling me, I would like doing it like this because it would give me satisfaction, well, that's lovely. But what's it going to mean for people experiencing food insecurity? And that's how we solve debates in this organization. So with the Farm Bill, that's how we ought to solve debates there too. What are the key priorities? Force rank the priorities, and then have a conversation after you've done that work. Then you have a conversation about, and therefore what? And therefore, how much money ought to go to subsidizing farms, and how much money ought to go to 40 million human beings who are trying to feed themselves and their families. And by the way, the stimulative, so there's something in it for all of us to reshape this thing. I talked about SNAP before. Let me give one more piece of data. Maybe I didn't share it yet, which is we have data that show for every $1 that you invest in SNAP, that the return in the economy is close to $2. There are very few things you can do
to double your money.
to double your money,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some people say, oh, yeah, but that just helps big box retailers like Walmart. Well,
Mm.
it does help big box retailers like Walmart, but it doesn't just help big box retailers like Walmart. There are data that show now we've got some refinements in the SNAP program where even places like farmers markets, you can use SNAP at farmers markets. You can use SNAP in little tiny businesses that need to be sustained by the neighborhood. You can use SNAP there. So it's stimulative for big, mid-sized, and small businesses. It's good for the economy and it's good for people. So it's one of those areas that I think we really ought to be more thoughtful about.
Will you talk a little bit about the root causes of food insecurity?
Absolutely. So one of the root causes of food insecurity is racism. There are systems that are founded on racism. And I think it's so hard for people to clinically answer questions like that without also on a personal level feeling like they're under attack, right? Are you saying I am a racist? I'm not saying you are a racist. I am saying that there are systems that perpetuate certain people staying down. It's not only people of color, by the way, but it includes people of color. There are systems that perpetuate people who live in rural America staying down. And we need to break through those systems. So what tends to happen, I was just recently in a big city though. I was in Seattle. And I remember I was going to talk to some people at the Seattle Club, which is an extraordinary organization. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it actually is where native tribal nations, people who belong to tribal nations, become a part of an actual club. But in order to be a part of that club, you actually have to be chronically unhoused, right? So chronically unhoused members of tribal nations. So I was there trying to understand what they're doing there, and they're doing some extraordinary things. But in the community that they're doing it, I looked around and I said, yeah, people say that this area is sketchy. But all of these businesses are shuttered, and here are the things that happen. And I said, oh no, what happens is what happens. What's happening is what happens. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, no. So there's certain things that it's ipso facto. If you divest in a community, if there are no jobs in a community, if there are no resources in a community, then certain things will naturally happen, right? When you take resources out of a community, there are certain other things that go up. So crime rates go up. Joblessness goes up. So you can choose to create an infrastructure that's supportive of people thriving. Or you can choose to perpetuate an infrastructure that isn't. And I think we need to choose to create an infrastructure that's supportive of people thriving. And I think we need to understand better as a nation that I just said it earlier this morning, believe it or not. I was talking about, I engage in what some people refer to as clarisms, right? So one of my clarisms is even if you say EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, there's always an I in it, right? And put it in different spaces. The I for inclusion is critical. And people need to understand that each of us actually have a role to play, and all of us benefit when we engage in equity work. When we break down these systems, it doesn't mean it's not zero sum, right? It's not, oh my goodness, we don't want any white people involved in this work. No, absolutely, it's critically important that white people be involved in the work. We don't want any men involved. Of course we want men involved in the work. The way I refer to it as larger tables, more chairs, larger tables, more chairs. So the types of systems that we work to break are divestment, where there is divestment, we want to invest. We want to invest in people, in communities. We want to not go into communities in a paternalistic way that says somehow because I went to X school or I had this, I grew up with more stuff, I know more than you do about what you need inside of your community. We can't go into communities with black boxes telling them, all you have to do, it's easy. All you have to do is just what I say, right? How's that working for us? It's not. It's not. But there are extraordinary innovations happening all across this country, and I get to see them, right? And the most powerful innovations that are happening right now are the innovations that are happening for communities by communities, where people are at tables, where resources become theirs. Here in Chicago, the Greater Chicago Food Depository is one of those extraordinary organizations. And I went to a place, New Life Center here, and during the pandemic, there's a ma and pa grocery store, which it's practically a food desert. It's an area called Little Village, which is the largest contingent, from what I am told, the largest contingent of people of Mexican descent outside of Mexico in the whole country live in Little Village here in Chicago. A lot of divestment in Little Village. Food desert in Little Village, meaning you have to go a long way in order to actually get access to a nutritious mix of food, right? But there was this mom and pop store that's right in the middle of Little Village. And during the pandemic, the owners who had gotten older decided they were going to move away and the store was going to shut down. The Greater Chicago Food Depository, practicing this ideal that I know results in the unlocks, decided that it would make investments where there were divestments and purchased the building. So I'm walking around the building with a group who are stewards of that asset. And in the space, there actually is going to be more nutrition in that space than it ever had before. We're going to supplement for-profit work with donated food so that community can get more access to a nutritious mix of food. We're going to have computers there at the disposal of the community, and we're going to connect people with the benefits that they're entitled to. It's going to be some workforce development training and access that will happen inside of that 3-story building, right? So here's the coolest part, Ben. So I'm walking around the building, and actually, the person who leads New Life, his name's Matt. So you'll remember his name. So I'm walking around with Matt, and he said the hardest thing for him to wrap his head around was when he would talk to the people at Greater Chicago, and he learned about the building being purchased. And he said, okay, so what will be the payment that we need to make? And I said, no, it's your building. And it's for this community, it's your building. And he said, well, okay, so when we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with it, what will the process be for you to decide whether you're going to accept what we're going to do? And I said, no, we're not going to decide what you're going to do with the building. I go, well, so wait, are you saying it's our building? We're saying it's your building. So the way that I describe it otherwise is this way. If you can imagine a microphone representing resources, and that we start with my microphone, my voice. And I think in philanthropies, we've actually made some progress to say, my microphone, your voice. But success will be your microphone, your voice. And that's what we're working on.
Claire, thanks. I know I just have about 6 minutes left, and I wanted to run through a number of questions that are. I'm
going to try to do rapid fire. I'll try.
You were recognized as a leader. You were recognized as a leader in the world, and in fact, in 2020, you were named Time's 100 Most Influential Persons of the Year. What's one thing you want to influence?
Lanyap.
Say again.
Lanyap, a Creole expression that means a little something extra. I want to spread this optimism and and this grace. I want people to spread kindness, to be kind to each other, to exercise grace. I want to be a part of that.
How do you spell Lanyat?
So I don't forget.
Thank you.
Lanyat.
What is the most important characteristic of a leader?
Caring.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Don't expect people to change. Instead, endeavor to ensure that they know when you and they want the same things.
You've referenced people you've worked with and family. Mentors seem to be part of your life.
Oh,
Is there a mentor that you would share a little bit about?
Tom Morris. He's the one who gave me that advice. I actually was at Walmart. He was general counsel at the time. I went there to complain about somebody, and I didn't think he liked the person I was about to complain about. So I thought, okay, we're set. He's just going to validate what I'm thinking. And he said, Claire, you're looking at this the wrong way. He said, instead of trying to figure out how you're going to change him and make him something that he's not, why don't you actually spend the time to understand what he cares about and figure out, are there things he cares about that you care about too? And then help him to know where those things are. And then figure out ways to win together without feeling the need that you're going to go change who he is fundamentally. It changed the way I approached that relationship, and it became one of the most affirming relationships I've ever had professionally in my life.
How does Feeding America measure success?
The arbiter of our success would be 53 million people. We measure it by impact. Are their lives better? If food insecurity rates don't go down, we're not successful. If more people don't get access to nutrition, we're not successful. Our success is measured. The arbiters are people experiencing food insecurity and their lives being made better.
How do you measure success personally?
What do I model? What do I model? That's what I would say. There we go. I finally got the words out.
Okay.
What do I model? I am an imperfect human being. It has actually required that my confidence grow in order for me to be able to accept that about myself. And I am imperfect out loud. But my imperfection does not mean that I get to rest in it and say, well, I'm not perfect and therefore I shouldn't make progress. I am out loud a work in progress. So I keep trying. I try hard. I care deeply. And I am true. There are many things that I am not, but I am true. If I say I believe it, it's only because I do. If I say I believe in you, it's because I believe in you. If I say this can happen, it is because it can. So
when you think, is there a piece of art or poem that you're drawn to? And I know that can change throughout life, but at this time in life, is there a piece of art that you enjoy?
It probably isn't one that I wish I had it with me. It's actually at my house. There's this piece that I was gifted. I went to a food bank in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is Feeding America of Eastern Wisconsin. And while I was there, they've got an apple orchard there. And they plant a tree for every significant stakeholder there. And it's a beautiful thing. And there's an artist who drew a mural on the building. And it was so beautiful. And I loved it. And I commented on how much I loved it. And they actually had that artist draw a piece for me. And it's of this beautiful, strong African-American woman holding her little boy with an apple in her hand. And there's so much optimism in that. There's so much empowerment in that. There's so much beauty in that picture that honestly I've been pretty selfish about it. That's why it's not in my office. I keep it at my house. I keep it at my house and I look at it just about every day.
Clara, thanks for spending time this morning. It's gone very fast, and really enjoyed the hour. And I look forward to future conversations. And thanks for your leadership and what you do and the impact that you have on so many people. It certainly makes a significant difference in the lives of many and all of us, because we're all connected to people that are food insecure and that are working across the country to meet this need that is systemic.
Well, whenever I get the chance to introduce myself, which is seldom, there's a way that I do it. And maybe after this conversation, people will understand why. When I do, I say, I'm Claire Babineaux-Fontenot, and it is my great privilege to serve as CEO of Feeding America. I feel so privileged that I get to do this work. And I feel privileged that I get to have conversations like this one with people like you who are dedicating your life, your talent to service as well. It gives me hope. It makes me hopeful. It makes me optimistic. It energizes me. This is not an easy fight, but it's certainly a fight worth doing. So thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks so much, Clara. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Look forward to future conversations.
That'll be my plan. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.